Hi, my name is Mark Cooperstein, and thank you for joining me today, where we're going to talk about the Azure API for Fire, and we're going to focus on our health platform architecture. With the final ruling of the ONC's Cures Act, Fire has become the preferred standard for exchanging electronic health information, and more importantly, enabling the management of PHI data in the cloud. As part of our commitment, make sure that health data is easily accessible. Microsoft focuses and has delivered on open source project for Fire, as well as the Azure API for Fire, a fully managed enterprise-grade service. Recently, the Health and Human Services released a Cures Act, which mandates the use of Fire in healthcare applications, along with some other requirements. We're seeing more and more customers demanding the use of Fire and moving in this direction. What I want to do today is spend a little bit of time talking about our architecture, not so much about a feature perspective, but thinking about Fire as a system, as a solution to help solve your problems. The architecture is going to span from ingestion all the way to use. And let's take a little bit of time and dive in. What you're going to see over the next several charts or slides is a concept, basically. We're using conceptual architecture. And it's important to remember that the concept architecture does not represent an exact physical deployment. It's about an idea. It's about a notion to help you get an idea of what's going on. But it's all in a very positive way and it'll make a ton of sense. Let's look at the architecture really, really simply. When you think about Azure API for Fire, it's really about user interfaces and data sources. It's about normalizing the data. And once I have this data in a normal form, how do I query and search it? How do I use it in analytics? How can I use it for machine learning and doing models? And along the way, how do I enrich and transform the data into something that's important to me, something I want to use? And how can I notify other people when changes occur in the data? So from a very simplistic point of view, this is our system, making sure we can bring data in and let you use it for all the things you want to use it for. But let's break it down a little bit. When we think about the architecture at a conceptual level, we have inputs on the left-hand side, the Internet of Medical Things, our electronic health records, imaging, data from our billing systems, our contact management, third party, or even social determinants of health. There's a plethora of sources of data that come in. And it's not so much that they go into the Azure API for Fire specifically as a service or as a server, but they are part of a solution that people want to build. On the right-hand side, we see the potential possible clients that may want to present the data. Power BI, our reporting tool, or maybe you want to write data back to an EHR. You have mobile devices, web, or smart on Fire apps, or maybe you're using Microsoft Teams or Microsoft Dynamics. Or better yet, what happens if you have a risk score and want to put the data back into Fire? But the architecture is broken down into pillars, and this is a really important notion. The first pillar is about ingesting and enriching the data. How can you pull a large volume of data of any variety and velocity into healthcare system? This is an important facet, bringing that data and ingesting it into the solution. Then, how do we persist it? How do we create that unified record, that unified longitudinal health record that tells me about my data, stores my data, and I can track its lineage back to where it came from? Then once I have this data persisted, how do I actually query it? How do I explore it? How do I operationalize it? How do I use it for something meaningful? And of course, once you go far enough, how do I learn new insights? Can I build AI models? How do I treat my data as the source of amazingly rich data, then feed my applications? Of course, all this has to be built so it can scale. If you think about these pillars and the systems, the inputs and the outputs, we have to have scale for this all to work. And of course, we have to have trust. The entire thing has to be secure, compliant, and operational. Now, if you think about this from a conceptual architecture point of view, behind the scenes, you can't build a system like this just on nothing. Behind the scenes, you bring Azure to bear. Azure Cloud has a ton of services that people use today. Well, okay, not a ton, but several hundred services that you put to use today. And how do you use them? How will you use them? We make use of a number of services, and we suggest that you, if you deploy our solution, will want to use services too. For example, Key Vault for managing your secrets, Azure Policy for controlling what somebody can do to your subscription or not do, more importantly, Azure Active Directory, maintaining your users, who has a permission and identity to use your systems, and more. So let's take it down another level. Again, conceptually, remember those pillars. Well, now you put processes into these pillars. When you bring the data in, you have to persist it. Is it going to persist in API for Fire? Or is it data that doesn't really fit in the Fire server, but yet really belongs in the Fire ecosystem? And we might put it in cloud storage. Once I have this data persisted, I want to be able to create cohorts, not one, but many, because cohorts are designed to meet needs, should they be for research or for applications. How do I treat this data? How do I use this data properly and control it? Control who has access and who specifically doesn't have access to data they don't need. I might want to do intelligent searching over the data, or in fact, do analytics or modeling over this data as well. Once I've done that modeling, I may want to run it through data science ML clusters, as you can see under intelligence, or use our cognitive AI services, or in fact, bots. And of course, everything feeds into the applications. You have a variety of applications that all want to be able to consume the data for different purposes. You might have somebody doing contact management with the patients, following up on surgery, or you might have the doctor or medical assistant who has point of care, capturing observations. All are valid applications, but they only need the data they need. They shouldn't have more than they need. Now talking about implementation, let's add another layer here. When we think about this now we're starting to introduce components. For example, IOMT. There's an orchestration piece that knows how to take IOMT data from the device's telemetry, bring it in, map it to patients, and store the data in Fire. You've also heard recently in other presentations about our HL7v2, how you can take that from your current systems, your EMRs, your EHRs, and we can convert it to Fire bundles and store them in Fire directly. A way of collecting data as it's happening. As new records are being entered into customers' EMR, how can you pull that data into Fire to aggregate it together and pull it together into a population view, for example? And of course, there's a number of other stores we've talked about earlier, and how do we ingest those? There's some type of data factory that knows how to do data orchestration. And of course, we're bringing it all into Fire, as I said, into Persist or into cloud storage. Now, once you have it there, what do you want to do with it? Well, we talked earlier about bringing it out for query and analytics or for intelligence. But in many scenarios, the data needs to be anonymized. We don't want a researcher, for example, does not need to see PII data. What they do need to see is the really vital data they need for doing their analytics. So we have an anonymization tool, which you've heard about in other videos, that will let you just bring data into your cohort, into your data store, and then you can search over it. You can do Databricks for analytics or use our new Synapse analytics engines. And of course, it all gets delivered to your applications. And in fact, it's even possible for these applications to read directly from the API for Fire. So all in all, the architecture is a pretty straightforward beast, if you will. It's a series of pillars about ingesting, persisting, query analytics, and intelligence, all designed to help you build really rich applications, of course, that are compliant and secure. Change subjects a little bit and spend the next few minutes talking about a thing called reference architectures and solutions. Now, some examples just by way of discussion. We talked earlier about ingesting HL7 messages. How would you actually put that together so you can pull it from your EMR, making sure it gets guaranteed delivered to Azure, where it's run through the Fire converter and stored into Fire? How do you put those pieces together? Our architecture shows you how to do that. Or about collecting IOMT patient telemetry. How do you bring that data into a system or multiple devices? How do you map the patient to the device? And how do you store the data in Fire? Another example, for the researcher, how do you extract a cohort from the Azure API for Fire? How do you anonymize it? How do you then sort in a data lake? And then how do you process it in Databricks or Jupyter Notebooks or HD Insight? You choose the tool. And of course, we have some really complex scenarios. How do you enable clinical decision support using Fire? These are all very rich and complicated solutions and problems that have to be solved, but many of you want to do this. What we offer you is a buffet, if you will, a place to go to find new solutions. And if you don't see one, let us know, and we'll look at it and figure out how we can recommend how to do it. We update this regularly. If you want to read about it, we suggest you check out AKMS Health Architecture. It'll take you right to the GitHub site. I hope you gain some benefit from this, and thank you.